The river flowed gently under the golden light of dawn, its surface rippling with peace. Claire stood at the edge, skipping stones. A rare moment of calm since returning home. Ruth sat nearby, her gaze lost in the distance. The faint smell of smoke reached Claire's nose, and she frowned. A line of scorched earth stretched across the forest floor. Then a sharp snap overhead, and a branch fell, sparking embers. She looked toward the hills. An orange glow flickered through the trees, growing larger. An orange glow flickered through the trees, growing larger. "Mom," Claire urged. "We need to go." Ruth shook her head, her voice firm. "I'm not leaving." The fire wasn't just threatening their home, it was threatening everything. If you enjoy stories like this, hit subscribe so you don't miss our next inspiring journey tomorrow. Claire Matthews adjusted her mother's blanket, tucking it securely around her shoulders. Ruth sat in her favorite chair by the window, a cup of tea cooling on the side table. The house was quiet except for the faint hum of the ceiling fan. Outside, the late summer heat lingered, heavy and oppressive. "Do you remember when we used to picnic by the river?" Ruth asked suddenly, her eyes lighting up. Claire paused, surprised by the clarity in her mother's voice. "Of course. You always made peanut butter sandwiches. And I'd complain because I wanted ham and cheese instead." Ruth chuckled softly, the sound both comforting and bittersweet. "You always were particular. But you loved skipping stones. Remember? You had such an arm. Just like your father." Claire smiled, holding on to the fleeting moment of lucidity. These glimpses into the mother she once knew were rare but precious. Most days, Ruth's dementia left her confused, her memories slipping away like sand through fingers. Claire had returned to her childhood home 6 months ago, leaving behind a career in the military to care for Ruth. The adjustment hadn't been easy. The woman who had once been her rock now needed constant care. And the role reversal often left Claire feeling unmoored. Her military training, rooted in discipline and structure, clashed with the unpredictable nature of Ruth's condition. Simple tasks like managing medications or coaxing Ruth to eat often spiraled into frustration. Yet Claire approached each day with the same determination that had carried her through years of service. "You treat this house like a barracks," Ruth had said one morning, her tone half teasing, half exasperated. "You don't have to march me to breakfast. You know. I'm just trying to keep us on track." "Mom," Claire had replied, though she couldn't deny the truth in Ruth's observation. The neighborhood was both familiar and unfamiliar. Many of the homes looked the same as they had in Claire's childhood, their facades weathered but sturdy. But some faces were new, and others were conspicuously absent. Longtime neighbors like Mrs. Evans, who lived across the street, often stopped by to check in. "Your mother used to babysit my kids," she'd said one afternoon, handing Claire a casserole. She was always so patient, even when they drove her crazy. These stories offered a glimpse into a version of Ruth that Claire had never fully known, adding another layer to her understanding of the woman she was now caring for. The first mention of the wildfire came during the evening news. Claire stood in the kitchen, rinsing dishes, as the anchor detailed a blaze in the hills several miles away. "Officials say the fire is contained for now, but residents should stay alert," the reporter warned. Claire glanced out the window, noting the faint orange tint to the horizon. She felt a flicker of unease but brushed it aside. Fires were common this time of year, and the authorities seemed confident. By the next morning, the smell of smoke hung in the air, Claire opened the front door and stepped onto the porch, scanning the sky. A thin layer of ash coated the railing, and the distant haze had thickened. "Is something burning?" Ruth asked, shuffling into the living room. "There's a fire in the hills," Claire said, keeping her tone calm. "But it's far from here. We're fine." Ruth frowned, her brow creasing. Fires spread. "Claire, you remember what happened to the Wilsons' barn that summer?" Claire did remember. She also remembered how Ruth had gathered the neighbors to help the Wilson family rebuild. It was a story Ruth had told countless times. And it always ended with the same moral: we take care of each other, no matter what. As the day wore on, the fire became harder to ignore. The local radio station issued updates every hour, and evacuation orders were announced for areas closer to the blaze. Claire began packing a bag, just in case. She focused on essentials: clothes for Ruth, medications, a few photo albums. "What are you doing?" Ruth asked, her tone sharp with confusion. "Just being prepared," Claire said, trying to sound casual. Ruth crossed her arms, her expression defiant. "I'm not leaving my home, Mom. It's just a precaution," Claire replied, though she knew convincing Ruth to evacuate would be an uphill battle. For now, she placed the bag by the front door and continued monitoring the news. The fire still seemed distant, but Claire's instincts told her to stay ready. That evening, as Claire helped Ruth settle into bed, she couldn't shake the feeling that life was about to change in ways she couldn't yet imagine. "Do you think the fire will come here?" Ruth asked softly, her earlier defiance replaced by vulnerability. Claire hesitated before answering. "I don't know, Mom. But if it does, we'll handle it together." Ruth nodded, her eyes closing. "You've always been strong, Claire. Just like your father." Claire sat with her mother until she fell asleep, the weight of responsibility heavy on her shoulders. Outside, the faint glow of the fire reflected off the clouds, a silent reminder of the dangers looming just beyond the horizon. For now, all Claire could do was wait and hope that her preparation and her resolve would be enough. The distant haze of smoke had thickened overnight, transforming the morning sky into an ominous shade of gray. Claire stood on the porch, her arms crossed, scanning the horizon as the acrid scent of burning wood drifted on the breeze. The news had been relentless: the wildfire was spreading faster than expected, its path unpredictable. Inside, Ruth sat at the kitchen table, nervously fiddling with a stack of photographs. "Do we really have to leave, Claire? This house is all I have left." "We're not leaving yet, Mom," Claire replied, her voice steady. "But we need to be ready, just in case." Ruth's brows furrowed. "I don't like just in case. It sounds like trouble." Claire crouched beside her, placing a hand on her arm. "I'll keep you safe, I promise. But I need you to trust me." Ruth hesitated, her fingers gripping the edge of a photograph. "You sound just like your father. He always promised to keep us safe too." Claire managed a small smile. "Then I must have learned from the best." By midday, evacuation orders for nearby neighborhoods began flooding in, and the air grew thick with tension. Claire moved methodically, packing a second bag with more essentials while Ruth hovered nearby, her confusion growing. "What about the china cabinet? And the albums in the attic?" Ruth asked, her tone increasingly frantic. "Mom, we can't take everything," Claire said gently, though her patience was wearing thin. "But they're important," Ruth insisted. Claire stopped packing and turned to face her mother. I know they are. But right now, the most important thing is getting you out safely. Everything else can be replaced. Ruth's shoulders slumped, and she nodded reluctantly. As the fire crept closer, Claire stepped outside to check on the neighbors. The air was heavy with smoke, and sirens wailed in the distance. At the end of the block, she spotted Mr. and Mrs. Evans, both in their late 70s, standing on their porch. "We're fine," Mr. Evans called as she approached, though the worry in his eyes betrayed his words. "Do you have a way to get out if the fire reaches us?" Claire asked. Mrs. Evans shook her head. "We've been here for 40 years. This house has survived everything." Claire softened her tone. "I understand. But this fire is different, it's moving fast. If you stay, you might not have time to get out later." Mr. Evans hesitated, glancing at his wife. "We don't want to be a burden." "You're not a burden," Claire said firmly. "I'll help you pack. Let's just get you somewhere safe. Okay?" With Claire's calm reassurance, the couple finally agreed. Together, they gathered their belongings, Claire carrying their bags to her car while the couple locked their doors one last time. As Claire returned to her house, a fire truck pulled into the neighborhood. Firefighters jumped out, their movements swift and purposeful. Among them was a tall, grizzled man with a weathered face and sharp eyes. "Excuse me," Claire called, stepping closer. "What's the plan for this block?" The man turned, appraising her with a quick glance. "We're doing a sweep, making sure everyone's out." "You live here?" "Yeah. My name's Claire Matthews," she said, extending a hand. "Marcus Taylor," he replied, shaking it. "You military?" "Used to be." Marcus nodded, his respect apparent. "That explains it. You've got the look." "The look?" Claire asked, raising an eyebrow. "Calm under pressure," Marcus said with a small grin. "We could use that around here. You up for helping us get people out?" Claire hesitated for only a moment before nodding. "Tell me what you need." The next few hours passed in a blur. Claire worked alongside Marcus and his team, knocking on doors and guiding residents to safety. Her military training proved invaluable. Her clear instructions and steady presence helped calm panicked families. At one house, a young mother struggled to wrangle her 3 children while trying to pack. Claire stepped in, gently taking the youngest child from her arms. "Let's focus on getting you out first," she said. "The rest can wait." The woman nodded tearfully, following Claire's lead as they loaded the children into the car. During a brief lull, Marcus handed Claire a bottle of water. "You're a natural at this," he said. "Old habits," Claire replied, taking a sip. Marcus studied her for a moment. "Military training is one thing, but not everyone can handle this kind of pressure. You've got a knack for keeping people calm." Claire shrugged. "I guess I just focus on what needs to be done." Marcus smiled. "That's what makes you good at it." Their conversation was cut short by a call over the radio. Another flare-up was threatening to cut off the main road. "Let's move," Marcus said, and Claire followed without hesitation. By nightfall, the neighborhood was nearly empty, and the fire was visible on the horizon, its orange glow a constant reminder of the danger. Claire returned home to find Ruth sitting in the living room, her packed bag by her side. "I thought you'd left me," Ruth said, her voice trembling. "I'd never leave you." "Mom," Claire said, kneeling beside her. Ruth reached out, placing a hand on Claire's cheek. "You're just like your father, always looking out for everyone else." Claire smiled, her exhaustion momentarily forgotten. It's in the job description. As she helped Ruth to her feet, the distant roar of the fire grew louder. The night wasn't over, but Claire was ready for whatever came next. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to our channel. It means so much to us. Now, let's get back to the story. The fire roared in the distance, a living wall of orange and red that devoured everything in its path. The radio crackled in the fire truck as Marcus adjusted the dial, his face grim. "We've got a call about a family trapped in a house near the fire line," he said, glancing at Claire. "2 adults and a kid. Address is about a mile from here." Claire sat forward, her instincts sharpening. "What's the plan?" Marcus hesitated. "It's dangerous. We don't know how close the fire's gotten." "I'm coming with you," Claire said, her tone leaving no room for debate. "You sure?" Marcus asked, his eyes searching hers. Claire nodded. "If there's a chance to save them, I'm not sitting this one out." The air grew thicker with smoke as they approached the house. The flames cast eerie shadows, and the heat pressed against them like a physical force. Marcus parked the truck a safe distance away, grabbing his gear and handing Claire a spare respirator. "Stay close," he said. "This isn't a battlefield, but it's just as unpredictable." Claire nodded, adjusting the mask over her face. Together, they moved quickly toward the house, the flames licking closer with every step. When they reached the front door, Marcus banged on it with the handle of his axe. "Fire department. Is anyone inside?" A faint voice responded, muffled by the thick walls. "Help! We're in here." Marcus swung the axe, breaking through the lock. The door creaked open, revealing a haze of smoke inside. The interior was chaotic. Furniture was overturned, and soot-covered walls bore the marks of panic. In the living room, they found the family huddled together, a man, a woman, and a boy no older than 6. "It's okay," Claire said, crouching to their level. "We're here to help. Can you walk?" The woman nodded, tears streaming down her soot-streaked face. "I think so. But my son, he's scared." Claire turned to the boy, her voice calm and steady. "Hey, buddy. My name's Claire. I know this is really scary, but I promise we'll get you out of here. Can you hold on to me?" The boy hesitated before nodding, his small arms wrapping tightly around her neck as she lifted him. "Which way?" Claire asked Marcus, her voice muffled through the mask. Marcus scanned the room, his experience guiding him. "Back door leads to the yard, but the fire's too close there. We'll have to go out the side." They moved quickly, Marcus clearing debris with his axe while Claire shielded the family from falling embers. The boy buried his face in her shoulder, his small body trembling. "Almost there," Claire whispered, though her heart raced with each step. When they reached the side door, Marcus pushed it open, revealing a narrow path bordered by flames. The heat was overwhelming, and the sound of the fire crackling was deafening. "This way," Marcus shouted, leading them through the path. Suddenly, a burning branch fell in their path, blocking their escape. Marcus cursed under his breath, his mind racing for alternatives. "We're running out of time," Claire said, her eyes darting around for another route. Back at the fire truck, Ruth sat nervously, watching the flames inch closer. She gripped the edge of her seat, her mind racing through fragments of memories. She remembered the area from years ago, back when she used to bring Claire here for picnics. There had been an old trail behind the house, a shortcut through the woods that led to a clearing. Ruth grabbed the radio and pressed the button. "Claire, can you hear me?" Claire's voice crackled through. "Mom? What are you doing?" "There's a trail," Ruth said, her voice firm despite the fear. "Behind the house. To the left. It'll take you to safety." Claire exchanged a glance with Marcus, who nodded. "If she's right, it's worth a shot." They backtracked through the house, smoke thickening with every step. Marcus located the trail Ruth had described, the entrance partially obscured by debris. "This is it," Marcus said, clearing the path. The family followed closely, with Claire still carrying the boy and Marcus helping the father, who had twisted his ankle in the chaos. The trail was narrow and treacherous, but Ruth's memory had been accurate. After several tense minutes, they emerged into a clearing, far enough from the fire to catch their breath. The family collapsed onto the grass, coughing and crying but safe. Claire handed the boy to his mother, her arms aching but her heart light with relief. "You saved us," the father said, his voice hoarse. "No," Claire replied, glancing at Marcus. "We saved you. Together." Later, back at the truck, Claire found Ruth sitting quietly, her hands folded in her lap. "You were right about the trail," Claire said, sitting beside her. Ruth looked at her daughter, her eyes brimming with both pride and worry. "I couldn't let you face that alone," Claire smiled, taking her mother's hand. "You didn't. We did this together." As the fire raged on in the distance, Claire realized that sometimes, even the smallest acts of courage could make the biggest difference. Together, they had saved more than lives, they had found strength in each other. The roar of the fire grew louder as Claire, Marcus, and the family pushed through the narrow trail. Smoke curled through the trees, burning their eyes and throats. Claire adjusted her grip on the boy in her arms, whispering softly to keep him calm. "You're doing great," she said, her voice muffled by her respirator. "We're almost there." Marcus, walking a few steps ahead, stopped suddenly, raising a hand to signal them to pause. "Hold up," he said, his tone sharp. The fire shifted. The wind must have turned. Claire looked up and saw the sky above them glowing red. Flames danced dangerously close on both sides of the trail, and ash rained down like snow. "What now?" Claire asked, her heart pounding. Marcus scanned the area, his trained eyes searching for a safe route. "The trail's too risky. We'll have to cut through the ravine over there," he said, pointing to a steep descent covered in thick underbrush. "It's going to slow us down," Claire said, already adjusting her plan. "It's our only shot," Marcus replied. The group carefully descended into the ravine, with Marcus clearing the way using his axe. Claire stayed at the rear, her senses on high alert. Every snap of a twig or shift in the wind made her stomach tighten. Halfway down, Marcus stumbled, catching himself on a tree trunk. Claire noticed him wince and slowed her pace to check on him. "You okay?" she asked, her voice laced with concern. "Just twisted my ankle," Marcus said, brushing it off. "Let's keep moving." But Claire could see he was in pain. His steps grew heavier, and he leaned more on his axe for support. When they reached the bottom of the ravine, the fire seemed to close in on them. The air was stifling, and visibility was limited to just a few feet. Marcus halted again, his breathing labored. "Claire," he said, his voice strained, "you're going to have to take the lead." Claire's eyes widened. "What about you?" "I'll be fine," Marcus assured her. "Just need a minute to catch my breath." "You can do this." Claire nodded, her military instincts kicking in. She turned to the family, her voice steady and commanding. Listen to me. Stay close. Keep low. And follow my lead. We're going to get through this. The parents nodded, holding tightly to their son. As they pressed forward, a sudden flare-up erupted ahead, blocking their path. The flames crackled violently, and the heat was suffocating. Back! Claire shouted, guiding the family away from the fire. She scanned the area, her mind racing. They were surrounded on 3 sides, and the 4th was too steep to climb. We're trapped, the father said, panic rising in his voice. No, we're not, Claire said firmly. We just need to think. Her eyes landed on a small depression in the ground, partially shielded by a cluster of rocks. It wasn't perfect, but it could provide temporary cover. Over there, she said, pointing to the rocks. Everyone, move! The group huddled in the makeshift shelter as the fire raged around them. Claire shielded the boy with her body, her heart hammering in her chest. Marcus, she called through her radio. We're pinned down. Any ideas? Hold tight, Marcus replied, his voice faint but steady. The fire's moving fast, but it'll burn through this area quickly. Wait for an opening. Minutes felt like hours as they crouched in the shelter, the heat pressing in from all sides. The boy clung to Claire, his small hands trembling. It's okay, she whispered, her voice calm despite the chaos. We're going to get through this. Finally, the flames began to recede, leaving behind smoldering embers. Marcus appeared, limping but determined. Let's move, he said, helping the father to his feet. The final stretch was the most treacherous. Fallen trees and burning debris littered the ground, forcing them to navigate carefully. Marcus directed them around hot spots, while Claire kept the group moving at a steady pace. At one point, the mother stumbled, nearly falling into a patch of embers. Claire caught her just in time, pulling her to safety. Thank you, the woman gasped, tears streaming down her face. We're almost there, Claire said, though exhaustion tugged at her every step. As they climbed out of the ravine, Claire spotted flashing lights in the distance. Fire trucks and emergency vehicles lined the road, their crews working tirelessly to contain the blaze. We made it, she said, her voice thick with relief. The family collapsed onto the ground, hugging each other tightly. The boy turned to Claire, his wide eyes filled with gratitude. Thank you, he whispered. Claire smiled, brushing soot from his cheek. You were really brave back there. Paramedics rushed to tend to Marcus, who waved them off with a tired smile. Just a scratch, he said, though his limp told a different story. Claire sat beside him, finally allowing herself to exhale. You did good, Marcus said, his voice low but sincere. We did good, Claire replied, her eyes meeting his. For a moment, they sat in silence, watching as the fire crews worked to secure the area. As the adrenaline faded, Claire felt a surge of emotion. The fire had tested her in ways she hadn't anticipated, but it had also reminded her of what she was capable of. She glanced back at the family, now safe and reunited, and felt a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. Sometimes it takes a fire to show us what we're made of, Marcus said, as if reading her thoughts. Claire nodded. And to remind us what we're fighting for. The fire was still burning, but for the first time, Claire felt a flicker of hope. Together, they had faced the flames and won. The morning after the rescue, the air was still thick with smoke, but the sky had shifted from an angry red to a pale gray. Emergency crews worked tirelessly to assess the damage and extinguish the remaining hotspots. Despite the destruction, a sense of calm had begun to settle over the neighborhood. Claire stood by the fire truck, arms crossed, as the rescued family approached. The father, his ankle now wrapped in a makeshift brace, extended his hand. "I don't know how to thank you," he said, his voice trembling with emotion. "You saved our lives." Claire shook his hand, her grip firm. "You don't have to thank me. I just did what needed to be done." The mother stepped forward, holding her son close. "You gave us hope when we thought we'd lost everything," she said, tears streaming down her soot-streaked face. "I'll never forget that." The boy, his wide eyes now bright with relief, looked up at Claire. "You were really brave," he whispered, clutching a small stuffed animal. Claire crouched to his level, managing a soft smile. "You were brave too. You didn't give up. And that's what matters most." As the family was guided to an ambulance, Marcus approached, his limp more pronounced but his expression resolute. "You've got a knack for this. You know," he said, his voice low and steady. "For what? Dodging fires?" Claire quipped, though the weight of the night was evident in her tone. "For leading," Marcus replied. "For keeping people calm when it counts. That's not something you can teach." Claire looked down, her thoughts swirling. "I spent so many years thinking my skills only mattered in the military. But last night felt different." "It should," Marcus said, leaning on his axe. "Because what you did mattered more than you realize." Back at home, Ruth sat in her favorite chair, a blanket draped over her lap. The fire had been contained just short of their neighborhood, sparing their house. Still, the events of the past day weighed heavily on her. Claire entered, her boots tracking ash across the floor. Ruth looked up, her eyes softening. "You're back," Ruth said, her voice tinged with both relief and pride. "I told you I'd come back," Claire replied, kneeling beside her. Ruth reached out, placing a hand on Claire's cheek. "I saw you out there, Claire. I saw what you did." Claire's throat tightened. "I just did what anyone would have done." "No," Ruth said firmly. "You did what only you could do. You've always been like that, strong, steady, willing to fight for others." Claire felt a swell of emotion. For so long, she had doubted herself, unsure if she could make a difference outside the structure of the military. But hearing those words from her mother filled a void she hadn't realized was there. "I'm proud of you," Ruth added, her voice breaking slightly. "So proud." In the days that followed, the community came together to rebuild. Neighbors cleared debris from yards, repaired fences, and shared meals. The local community center became a hub of activity, with volunteers organizing donations and distributing supplies. Claire found herself drawn to the efforts, her natural leadership instincts taking over. She coordinated teams to assist elderly residents, using her military experience to streamline tasks and ensure everyone had what they needed. "You're a natural," Marcus said one afternoon, watching as Claire directed a group of volunteers. "I'm just doing what I can," Claire replied, wiping sweat from her brow. Marcus smiled. "You ever think about doing this full-time? Emergency response? Maybe?" Claire paused, considering his words. "I don't know. I've always thought of myself as a soldier. This feels different." "It's not so different," Marcus said. "It's about serving, protecting, and making sure people are safe." "Sound familiar?" Claire nodded slowly. "It does. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Claire stood outside her house, looking over the neighborhood. The scars of the fire were still visible, but so was the resilience of the community. Ruth joined her, leaning on a cane. "You've been busy," she said, her voice light with humor. "Someone has to keep things moving." Claire replied with a smile. Ruth looked out at the neighborhood. "This place, it's special, isn't it?" Claire nodded. "It is. And I think I finally understand why you stayed here all these years. It's not just a place, it's the people." Ruth placed a hand on Claire's arm. "And now, it's your place too." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Claire reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She had left the military searching for purpose, unsure if she could find it in civilian life. But the fire had shown her that purpose wasn't tied to a uniform, it was tied to the willingness to serve. No matter the circumstances. Sacrifice and compassion weren't limited to battlefields. They were found in small acts of kindness, in moments of courage, and in the bonds formed during the most challenging times. "I think I'll stay," Claire said softly, almost to herself. Ruth smiled. "Good. This community needs someone like you." And for the first time in a long time, Claire felt like she had found where she belonged. She wasn't just rebuilding homes, she was rebuilding her life. One step at a time. The fire had tested her limits, but it had also revealed her strength. And as she stood there, surrounded by the people she had fought to protect, Claire knew she was exactly where she was meant to be.
The wildfire tested everything Claire thought she knew about herself. In its wake, she found purpose, hope, and a future worth fighting for. What lessons have you learned from moments of adversity? Share your thoughts and this story with others. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.